Pointing the finger, Chapter 1. I'll do that paper round, Mr. Armstrong, Daniel Rutledge offered, counting out the evening newspapers for his normal round. The newsagent and Tim, Daniel's best friend, stared at him as if he'd gone mad. Then Tim gasped, "Gibbet's Hollow? You want to deliver down Gibbet's Hollow? Are you nuts?" Daniel looked up innocently. "Nope, there's some big posh houses down Gibbet's Hollow. Just think of the Christmas tips I'll get." Mr. Armstrong raised one bushy eyebrow. "Are you sure, Daniel? None of the other kids want anything to do with it." "I've been delivering papers there myself, morning and night for ages, and I don't hang around, I can tell you. There was one night—" I know, I've heard the rumours and the legends," said Daniel, deciding that Mr. Armstrong read too many of those horror books that he stocked. "Ghosts don't scare me, don't believe in them anyway." "Neither do I," Mr. Armstrong sniffed. "I'm not saying I saw a ghost, but I definitely saw a misty white shape hovering near the hedgerows." Daniel grinned as he slid the pile of papers into his sack. Yeah, it was probably a sheep." "This was no sheep," said Mr. Armstrong, neatening the rows of chocolate bars on the counter. "It was human size, and it drifted along the lane down by the cemetery." Daniel glanced at Tim, still grinning, but Tim was staring at the newsagent, looking like he believed every word. "Well, I don't fancy delivering down Gibbet's Hollow," Tim said, shaking his head. "In the olden days it was where they hung people for murder and sheep stealing. That's how it got its name. The gibbet was the gallows." "Yeah, 100 years ago," shrugged Daniel. "What about the legend? The farmer who was hung for a murder he didn't do. His ghost is supposed to haunt the place." "Woo!" Daniel wailed, wiggling his fingers. "Ghosts and ghouls, scary stuff. I don't think." He glanced hopefully at the newsagents. "Anyway, can I add Gibbet's Hollow to my paper round?" Mr. Armstrong still looked unsure. "You'd better check with your parents first, Daniel. Gibbet's Hollow is way off the beaten track. It's dark mornings and evenings this time of year too." "I'm not walking, I've got my bike," Daniel reminded him. "Anyway, most of my round is quiet and lonely. Doesn't bother me." "Even so, check with your mother." "OK, but you will pay me extra for doing it, won't you, Mr. Armstrong?" said Daniel, pretending to recount his papers so that Mr. Armstrong couldn't see his face. There was no way his parents would agree to letting him deliver down Gibbet's Hollow. "Naturally. Truth is, I'd be glad to get rid of the job. It's hardly worth my while. Even so, a customer is a customer, but I'll be surprised if you stick it for a week." "I'll be fine," Daniel said confidently, hoisting his sack onto his shoulder and pulling up the hood of his coat. "Ready, Tim?" "Ready, mate." Outside, the late November air smelled of fog. It was icy cold, and their breath formed white misty patches in the dark. "Why the heck do you want to do Gibbet's Hollow?" Tim complained as they set off on their bikes. "It'll be more trouble than it's worth." "It's all money, isn't it?" Daniel shrugged. "I'll get paid more by Mr. Armstrong, and then there'll be all those Christmas tips from his customers. I need the extra." "Oh yeah, I forgot," Tim nodded, riding one-handed as he pulled his scarf up round his mouth. "Your dad's still out of work, isn't he?" Daniel nodded. "Your parents won't want you delivering down Gibbet's Hollow, just for them, you know." Daniel hesitated before answering. He did know. He didn't need reminding. Quietly he said, "Yeah, well, what they don't know won't hurt them." At 7 o'clock the following morning, Daniel propped his bike against the newsagent's window and went in. "Morning, Mr. Armstrong." "Morning, Daniel. Nippy out, isn't it?" Daniel pulled his gloves off and breathed on his fingers. "Just a bit." "Still want to do Gibbet's Hollow?" "You bet," Daniel agreed, making a start on the morning's papers. "So what did your mum say?" he asked, eyeing Daniel closely. Tim came in before Daniel could reply, scarf wrapped round his mouth and woolly hat pulled over his ears. Concentrating on his papers, Daniel replied, "She said that I should go for it." "You're not fibbing, are you?" Mr. Armstrong quizzed. Daniel looked straight at the newsagent, his brown eyes wide and innocent. "My parents don't believe in ghosts either. They think it's all a load of rubbish. At least that bit wasn't a fib." The newsagent shoved his hands into his cardigan pockets, worry lines creasing his forehead. "It's not the legend that bothers me, Daniel. It's the fact that Gibbet's Hollow is a lonely old place to be." "I'll be okay, honestly," Daniel promised, "and I could really do with the extra cash." "Well, if your mum doesn't object." He handed Daniel a card. "Here, these are the new addresses. And now, seeing as I don't have to go out and deliver them myself, I think I'll have myself a nice cup of tea. See you for the evening round, lads. Oh, and Daniel? Yes, Mr. Armstrong? You be careful. No worries. Outside, with his paper sack slightly heavier than normal, Daniel gave his pal a friendly nudge. Thanks, Tim. What for? Daniel kept his voice low. For not letting on that my mum doesn't know. That's okay, said Tim, mounting his bike. I thought I might come with you, actually. We'll be finished our normal rounds by 7:45. I'll meet you by the bridge and cycle down to Gibbet's Hollow with you. I'm not scared of going on my own, Daniel said, casting Tim a sideways glance. I know that, but I may as well. We can carry straight on to school then, as usual. OK, Daniel agreed, swinging his legs over his crossbar. See you on the bridge at 7:45. Daniel's normal paper round took him around the council estate, while Tim's covered the semi-detached houses on the edge of town. It would be good cycling out to Gibbet's Hollow, Daniel thought, as he delivered his usual papers. He loved the countryside, and Gibbet's Hollow was all hills and fields. He was actually quite glad Tim was coming with him, as it had been ages since they'd been on a bike ride together. Yeah, it would be good. Halfway through his normal paper round, a thought struck him. He hoped he could figure out which houses to deliver to. The trouble with big old country houses was that they just didn't have numbers on the doors. They all had names like Rose Cottage and Dunromin, which didn't help when you were looking for number 27 or 33. Oh well, he'd figured it out. Finally, he cycled out of town towards the bridge. It was still quite dark, even though it was almost 7:45 in the morning. Cars still had their headlights on, and lampposts glowed a fuzzy orange colour. And then there were no lampposts at all. The bridge where he was meeting Tim was a footbridge that spanned the dark brook. Daniel dismounted and peered down at the crystal water. It made a nice rippling sound over the pebbles. In summer, he and Tim came here fishing for minnows. He didn't fancy that now, it was much too cold. Daylight was struggling to break through a grey, dull morning that promised another dull November day. Hey, Danny! Daniel spotted Tim cycling towards him. What kept you? Chickened out yet? No chance, said Daniel, reading a card Mr. Armstrong had given him as Tim skidded alongside. Hey, this is good. He's described the houses as well. Look, hilltop. First big house on the right in Gibbet's Hollow. Long gravel drive. Hang on, what's this he's put in brackets? Watch out for the Rottweilers. Tim peered over his shoulder. Rottweilers? That's what he's written, said Daniel, pulling a face. Hope they're not too fierce. Anyway, the next house. According to this, the tall, thin house with the vegetable garden that backs onto the field. OK, that sounds fine. Then where? Asked Tim. Nice white bungalow opposite. Author's house, read Daniel. OK, that should be easy to find. An author? Wow, Tim exclaimed. Wonder if he's famous. Daniel shrugged. Dunno. Anyway, then we go to the bottom of the hill to an overgrown cottage on the right, then up the hill to the vicarage. Ha, watch out for the ghost, it says here in brackets. Strange sense of humour, our Mr. Armstrong. 5 papers, Tim exclaimed. It's not worth it. Yes, it is, argued Daniel. He's paying me extra because it saves him doing it. It won't take long, and think of the lovely Christmas tips. You hope, said Tim, looking doubtful. Still, you're right about one thing. Shouldn't take us long. Are you ready? Daniel jumped on his bike. Sure am. Let's go. It was only as they set off towards Gibbet's Hollow that Daniel discovered the first hitch in his calculations. Gibbet's Hollow was much further out of town than he'd thought. Where is it then? Tim asked, puffing from cycling up and down hills. There'll be signposts in a minute, Daniel answered. But it was another 5 minutes solid pedalling before they spotted the rickety old wooden sign on the left. At last, Tim gasped. I'm shattered. They turned into Gibbet's Lane, which was narrow and winding and lined with stark, bleak winter trees. This is creepy, Tim murmured, glancing around as they cycled beneath an archway of leafless branches. Daniel grinned. No, it's not. This is great. I love the countryside. Look, there's a rabbit. We don't see rabbits in our normal rounds, do we? Number 7, Green Lane's got a rabbit. Ha ha, groaned Daniel. After a few minutes more, they spotted the sign at the side of the road. Gibbet's Hollow, please drive carefully. At least it doesn't say Gibbet's Hollow, enter at your peril, Daniel said, grinning. Yeah, or drive carefully, ghost for the next half mile, said Tim, trying to make a joke out of it. Daniel slowed down as he spotted the first house on the list, Hilltop. He stopped outside its double gates, taking a breather to gaze out across the fields and down into Gibbet's Hollow. At the bottom of the hill, a grey mist lay settled in the hollow, like a cloud that had fallen out of the sky. It looked a ghostly sort of place, if you believed in ghosts, that is.